the benefits that come from community involvement in this. The other aspect we wanted to raise around stakeholder engagement is, for argument's sake, not reinventing the wheel. The mining industry has been doing ecological restoration for many years. They've invested billions of dollars in doing some of this, more or less successfully, absolutely. I mean, in some cases, not really well. In other places, it's got very sophisticated. So it's not a matter of kind of reinventing the wheel. It's learning from others who've been trying to apply this for a long time. And again, involving others that have a real interest in this. I mean, the community angle is a very important one.
Thank you, Andrew. The question of culture, engagement, and therefore how we go about capacity building, I guess, was the point. Is there can people here build on how we might go about building capacity around cultural community engagement to support ecological restoration associated with protected areas, or in between?
One of the things we talked about was the relationship between community engagement and governance structures. And so, do we have the capacity to implement protected area governance structures that involve and engage communities in an effective way? Cooperative management models and other things that to a degree institutionalize that engagement process.
Thanks, Aaron.
Okay, so we discussed that engaging the community is very important if we are engaging them to creating the shared vision together from the beginning. But for that, we need a shared and commonly understood language beyond the jargon. And also, if we have that, we can raise awareness about the bottom line issues. And then we can create a shared vision with them. But without that, we can't engage them.
Thank you. So that, again, it sort of comes back with it. You can see what's happening here is we're identifying that we need clarity of objective and that we need to have some appropriate governance or structure around how we do that. So I think that's useful in terms of some of the dialogue. Does anyone have another point or something to add to that existing?
We talked about traditional knowledge because we feel like the local people have the traditional knowledge, so they can come up with what would be suitable to restore the area. Not forgetting that you also need experts. So sometimes the absence of an expert can jeopardize the whole project.
Thank you, and certainly recognising the significance of traditional knowledge in building ecological restoration of protected areas comes across well in the guidelines. So again, it reinforces what's described in the guidelines and re-emphasises the critical nature of building that into your objectives and your planning for restoration.
One of my groups was very keen to mention that reconnecting communities with nature could be done by fostering the ecological restoration outside national parks or between national parks. So it wasn't just a thing constrained to parks.
All about parks, David.
Pardon?
All about parks.
That was a joke for those that missed it.
I missed it, sorry.
We had the same discussion to a degree that particularly reducing pressures from in the outside of the parks is a challenge, and having the capacity to do that, to manage the pressures on the park that are occurring because of activities outside.
I'll add that to a little bit more as well. There is a new group that's established that is looking at connectivity conservation across the globe. That group's developed a network to share knowledge and keep people connected, strangely enough, with the work of a range of organisations and individuals undertaking ecological restoration within and outside of parks. That group's called the International Connectivity Conservation Network, and that was launched yesterday. Does anyone have any other key points? We're just coming down to the last few minutes, so if there are any other key points that you want to get captured on the board, then please don't be shy.
The policy and legal framework in which you operate is obviously critically important, and it's an argument for actually making sure that you have strategies to maximise community engagement, because the more people you have involved, the more likely you are to get the policy and legal changes that you might need to encourage this, and the more likely you will be to get dollars as well.
Thanks, Virginia. A lot of conversation has been had recently about a social licence to operate, and I think that sort of follows that comment by Virginia about having clear strategy policies, but also having a group of community that are actually advocating for this work and not just relying on a small few. Okay, does anyone have any other critical points that they want to make sure we don't miss in this conversation? And then I'll try and wrap up and talk about where to from here.
We had one that we're not sure if it was raised or not, but it's the need to understand the context, both the spatial context and the temporal context within which you're restoring. So looking, I think it links to some of the other things that were said, but knowing what's going on around outside the borders, but also looking forward, for example, in the case of climate change and other kind of drivers.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any other comments or additions that they want to add to the board? You've felt that you've had an opportunity to get your points across. If there's anything that you'd like to add, time to yell out.
I don't know whether you've talked about
finances.
Oh no!
This is why you need a little policy framework, because if you have that, probably you will get the resources. So this was our link.
So I think that's a good point. We do need some money, and I think that flows from a good policy and good community advocacy to support such propositions. Wrapping down in the last couple of comments, so
I just think about that, but maybe we should be ready to restore less, to restore better, to be efficient, to be ready to put only a small space, a smaller space than what you think at the beginning, to be sure to do it well. You cannot maybe restore all the ecosystem because of pressure, because of use you are doing of this ecosystem. But maybe in terms of efficiency, it should be better to restore less.
Prioritize.
yeah, I would go to exactly that point, which is one again highlighted in the guidelines. About the right place to do the ecological restoration. What are the priorities to do the work? So you need to understand that in the context of where you're operating. So what priorities exist in whichever context you operate in to undertake the ecological restoration, because it does come down to money to actually do that and the support of the community to do that. So generally you don't have the capacity to do that all over the place. So prioritisation becomes important. Closing comments?
Talking about finances, we also thought that your restoration plan should be simple and best fit for the area.
Okay. I think we're just about there. Systems, no? Yeah, okay. Final comment here, and then we'll talk about where to and next steps.
So we
resistance we introduced, that we were trying to put together all of the things which is in line in linear way described. So we try to put the system, and I think it's very important when you do your planning and when you do something to create a connection between the different parts, because the characteristic of your work, of our work is mainly between the connections, not what the lines. So it means that you have to define what we are thinking about, what we are working about, but then identify the connections, how they fit to each other, and that we have to put our energy to influence the others. And it seems, in this picture, it seems that the community engagement is one of the key points, because it helps us into the other parts, the visions and implementation, the policy framework and the money. So it means it, in our picture it came out that it was one of the key points.
Thank you, everyone. I'll do a couple of comments and then hand back to Karen to wrap up the session. I'd also like to offer a few small gifts for your participation, and particularly those people that got lumbered with the scribing and things. So just bear with me a second. Just a small token of appreciation for those people that did the scribing. And for the rest of the team here, a number of pins or key tags that you can help yourself to as well. So I'll just leave those here, and you can grab one or a number on your way out in a minute. Where we're going with all of this information, obviously the guidelines have been released, and we're hoping to ensure that those guidelines are widely distributed and understood across the globe, and that you encourage your communities, your partner, your organisations to look at those guidelines and work through those guidelines as a way of applying ecological restoration in parks and beyond parks. So I encourage you to share those guidelines with your colleagues and the rest of the world. In 2014, we will be in Sydney for the World Parks Congress, of which we'd be hoping to showcase the success of these guidelines and demonstrate practical examples where people have looked at the guidelines, applied those guidelines, and lo and behold, we've restored the particular protected area or improved the ecological restoration of a particular site. So as you think about leaving here and taking the guidelines with you, I encourage you to think about how you could showcase your success in ecological restoration come the World Parks Congress in 2014. On that note, thank you for your participation in helping us get some ideas about capacity. I hope it's helped you, one, understand the guidelines. We'll be taking this information and using that to help the team that developed the guidelines to actually progress and build the necessary capacity and support to enable you to deliver ecological restoration. Closing comment would be on Monday at 2:30 for those that are interested. There is a connectivity, conservation and law workshop that will look at visions for large landscape scale conservation, as well as the law and the policy settings for conservation work. So that's on Monday at 2:30, just to get a plug in.
Whereabouts?
Hala Hall, eh? Is it H? How do you say? Hala Hall 1 or A? Hala. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Ian. As Ian said, I think one of the things that we'd like to see is to spread the word and to build awareness of this approach. I've left copies of the guidelines on the back table, and there's also, as I mentioned earlier, an associated motion to the Members' Assembly here that calls for exactly that, wide adoption and implementation of this guidance, the development of and sharing of case examples, and consideration of
additional tools and strategies for building capacity. So if you're interested, please have a look. If you're voting or in touch with those who are voting in the Members' Assembly, please encourage them to have a look at the motion and evaluate it. And please get in touch with us through the WCPA to generate additional ideas over the next couple of years. Share with us your work so that we can continue to showcase progress in this area as we lead up to the World Parks Congress and then subsequently to the next IUCN World Conservation Congress as well. Thank you very much. It was really interesting to hear your ideas and appreciate you being here.
Thank you.